Good morning and welcome to the KDPG Sunday edition. I'm Ken Rice. President Trump now has the chance to choose another justice for the United States Supreme Court and perhaps change the direction of the High Court for years to come. We begin this morning with Jan Crawford reporting that because it's Justice Anthony Kennedy appointed by President 30 years ago, it has extra significance.
Tremendous service.
The president was formally notified in a letter delivered to the White House. After 30 years on the court, Justice Anthony Kennedy would retire.
And we will begin our search for a new justice of the United States Supreme Court that will begin immediately.
A key swing vote. The 81-year-old's retirement gives the president the chance to turn the court more solidly to the right for a generation. Democrats warned of a fight.
People from all across America should realize that their rights and opportunities are threatened.
But firmly in control of the Senate, Republicans said a new justice would be on the court by October.
We will vote to confirm Justice Kennedy's successor this fall.
The bitter divide was in stark contrast to the gentlemanly justice who sometimes crossed ideological lines.
I am today announcing my intention to nominate United States Circuit Judge Anthony Kennedy.
Nominated by President Ronald Reagan,
I, Anthony Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
Kennedy was confirmed unanimously. He sometimes sided with liberals on key social issues, earning him a reputation as a swing vote.
I hate that term. It has this visual image of these spatial gyrations. The cases swing, I don't.
His defining legacy will be gay rights. He wrote all the major decisions striking down laws banning homosexuality and legalizing same-sex marriage nationwide, writing that same-sex couples were seeking equal dignity in the eyes of the law. But far more often, Kennedy was with conservatives. He wrote a sharp dissent in the decision upholding Obamacare. And while he refused to overturn Roe v. Wade, he allowed restrictions on abortion rights.
And already in Washington, this is gearing up to be a fight over abortion. There is one justice on the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas, who said he would overturn Roe versus Wade. We don't know how the other three conservatives would rule, but two liberal justices are now going to be in their 80s this year. So the specter of a retirement and a shift in the court is something that's going to affect elections for years to come. Jan Crawford, CBS News, the Supreme Court.
This morning on the KDPG Sunday edition, what Justice Kennedy's retirement means to the U.S. Supreme Court and the effect it could have on some of the most controversial cases the court will have to consider. A little bit later, we'll hear from Duquesne University law professor Bruce Ledowitz and West Virginia University law professor Anne-Marie LaFaso. But first, we welcome back David Hickton to this program. He is the founding director of the University of Pittsburgh Institute for Cyber Law, Policy, and Security. He was previously United States Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania for 6 years, appointed by President Barack Obama. David Tribman is away this week, and for the first time, I'm delighted to welcome Sally Stapleton, managing editor of the Post-Gazette, for our discussion. Sally,
thank
welcome.
you very much.
Nice to have you aboard, and welcome back to the show, Mr. Hickton.
Thank you.
So Kennedy was so interesting because unlike, say, Clarence Thomas or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who you sort of had a sense how they might rule on a case, Kennedy, you didn't always know.
Yeah, he was a conservative justice, to be sure, but I think the way you become notable on the Supreme Court is you surprise people. And since he was appointed by Ronald Reagan, he was expected to be at the far end of the spectrum of conservatives, and he wasn't. He was often the deciding vote, the pivot vote on some fairly key decisions, and particularly, as the lead noted, in the area of abortion rights, where he repeatedly had the opportunity to overturn Roe versus Wade by his vote. He did not. And in the area of individual rights, particularly for sexual preference, he wrote a series of opinions that were very important statements about preserving constitutional protections for all Americans.
Do you like what has become of the Supreme Court? Do you suppose the framers would be pleased with the fact that we have what people view as a conservative bloc and a liberal bloc? Let me put it this way. Were you a liberal federal prosecutor, or were you a conservative federal prosecutor?
No, I was not, and I think that's just an outstanding question.
You were just a federal prosecutor.
I was picked in a political process for a job that was non-political. So once I took my oath of office, I considered myself neither a Democrat nor a Republican. I was U.S. Attorney for everyone. and I took politics out of all of my decision making. And I think that's what the Supreme Court is supposed to do. And I do mourn the fact that the Supreme Court is often described in political terms. As you point out, the framers created 3 separate and co-equal branches of government. And the Supreme Court, under Article 3, is supposed to interpret the law, not make the law. They're not supposed to put the robe on to do what Congress does. And critics of the Supreme Court on the right frequently say that we need more strict construction of the Constitution and that that's where it started, but everybody fundamentally agrees they're not supposed to make the law. The question is strict construction the proper framework? Are we supposed to interpret the Constitution as we did when we were on horseback with muskets, or as it is a living and breathing document? And that's where the debate is. But in the most recent decisions just this week, the headlines are the Supreme Court on partisan terms decided 5-4, and I don't like that.
Yeah, and Sally, I'll let you jump in just a second. Would it be ideal, perhaps, from your perspective, if every justice were seen as perhaps a swing vote, because on every issue, politics would be completely absent and it would strictly be about the law?
It would be, but I think it would also not reflect the fact that elections matter. And that's the story of this appointment. Elections matter. This would be an entirely different framework. Perhaps he wouldn't even be retiring if the election had gone the other way. I'm among those who believe that this really isn't as much of a big deal as it's being reported on both the right and the left. I think the story here is this is going to raise the profile of John Roberts and give him the ability to lead the Roberts Court. Justice Kennedy was a pivot vote, but he followed Sandra Day O'Connor, which was the prior pivot vote. And he and she both reflect a tradition that Earl Warren also represents, that sometimes presidents are surprised when they appoint someone they think will be a reliable vote for a point of view. And I think it changes people when they take it changes people when they put the robe on, and I think we are frequently surprised. Look at Justice Roberts. He was the pivot vote that made the Affordable Care Act constitutional. And recently, just this week in the Carpenter case, he cast a pivotal vote that was cheered by the left and privacy advocates because it required a warrant for the collection of telephone data, and that was a surprise. So I think what we're going to see now is the ascendancy of Justice Roberts as the true leader. The next appointment after this one will tilt the balance.
So if we could, let's talk about the politics before a nominee is confirmed. That's going to be really interesting, it would seem, due to previous Senates led by one party who did not allow President Obama to put through a candidate. Then, when President Trump arrived in 2 months, Gorsuch was confirmed. How is this one going to play out?
That's a great question. There's a lot of politics involved here, and I think a further factor is the continual assault on our institutions by President Trump. Because love him or hate him, it cannot be debated that he is attacking the institutions that we've taken for granted. He's attacked the press. Whether he likes the press or not, it seems to me he should be trying to help the press, because the press has made us free for a long time, and while they may make mistakes, you don't attack them. I was in law enforcement. Law enforcement probably voted 100-0 for President Trump. He's attacking law enforcement. He's attacking the FBI. And so the Supreme Court is really important today if we're going to endure an assault on our institutions or co-equal branches of government. But the politics has changed because we've abandoned the rule of cloture, the 60-vote supermajority, which was supposed to protect against a fringe nominee. And it started before Mitch McConnell, to be fair, involving circuit judges, which is the level right below the Supreme Court. And then it was extended by Mitch McConnell in a very surprising way to me, because Merrick Garland was about as conservative as a nominee Barack Obama could have picked. He was a centrist who John Roberts himself identified as perhaps the best, most qualified person to go on the Supreme Court. But the Republicans dug in an election year, and it proved to be an effective strategy, led directly to the Gorsuch nomination.
But that was a gamble, because no one knew at that time President Trump was good. Donald Trump would become president.
They didn't, and it's probably more likely than not, if Hillary Clinton had won the election, Merrick Garland might not have been appointed by her. he was a very well-respected center-of-the-road judge. So it proves that our system is based a little bit on the good faith of the people who have the power. And in my opinion, President Obama tried to nominate someone who would have broad appeal. The removal of the 60-vote supermajority allows the party in the majority to pick someone. Well, it's now basically a 51-49 Senate with John McCain a wild card because he's sick and he's demonstrated independence from this administration. Jeff Flake, the other Arizona senator, is currently holding up circuit nominations as a Republican headed to retirement because he opposes this immigration policy of separation of families. And just yesterday, I understand 2 other Republicans, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, were entertained at the White House because they're concerned about their votes. So it is possible, although not likely, that before the November election, the president will be rebuffed by the Republican majority in the Senate.
But he's got a few Democrats in tight races in red states who voted for Gorsuch and who might find it politically advantageous to vote for whoever his nominee this time, Manchin, Heitkamp, and Donnelly from Indiana.
Correct. They all three will be running for elections in races where the last election the majority was almost 20 points on average.
So he could maybe lose Collins and Murkowski, but if he picks up the 3 Dems, I just wonder if the founders, again, would have foreseen this type of, I guess they did, because they created all these checks and balances. So they understood human nature, they understood the political nature of people, and they created a system where no one branch could have that much impact.
Yeah, and a judge is allowed to have strongly held views. But a judge, once they take their oath, is supposed to interpret the law. And of course, that's where there's debate about what that means and how far a judge can go. But I think what you're going to see is, no matter who he appoints, is the Roe versus Wade decision is in the breach. There is a possibility that a future Supreme Court could overrule it, but then politically a future Congress could enact a law.
Right. That's right. There's always a balance. Unfortunately, we have to take a break. I'm sorry, Sally. Thank you, David Hickton. Nice to have you back. When the KDPG Sunday edition continues, we'll hear the thoughts of 2 local law professors on the future of the court. We'll be right back.